Okay, so today we will be talking about the movie Under the Skin, released in 2013, directed by Johnathan Glazer and written by Johnathan Glazer and Walter Campbell. This movie is really hard to pinpoint into a genre. IMDb says it is a sci-fi drama, but I feel as if this is more of a psychological horror, just based upon the everything that we will be talking about. Plot summary?
Okay, so I think before we dive into deciding formalism versus realism versus naturalism, it's a very complicated plot and hard to understand. So here's my basic understanding of it: is that it opens up and she's kind of being made, or she's taking the form of a human, and she's trying to blend in with human society, and she kind of goes out into like the city, and tries to basically kind of lure men back into wherever she takes them, that kind of black area, and get their meat, quote unquote. And then basically she does this like twice, I believe. And then she meets a guy with like a facial kind of deformity. And she kind of starts realizing and starts building empathy and starts kind of wanting for that human emotion and wants to start kind of live like a human. And so she kind of goes rogue, I guess, and tries to kind of become a human. Like when she tries eating the cake or having a relationship with that man, she's like kind of exploring being human, but realizing ultimately she can't because she's not human. And so she goes to the woods, obviously, so she needs to be alone and kind of be by herself and not to be human, I guess, but can be as close to human as possible. And then that's where she encounters kind of the rapist who ultimately kills her. And yeah, that's the movie.
A little wild. Just
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
So our big topic for today is, where this movie lies, where this film lies in regards to what's naturalism, what's realism, and what's formalism. And I think we've all agreed that it's really hard to pinpoint this in one scenario. We all believe that it's a combination of naturalism and formalism. Flora, do you want to talk about that, how they don't exactly blend?
Sure, right. So we were talking about in class today, the snake biting its own tail kind of metaphor, where things are so naturalistic and they mimic reality so quickly, like with really shaky handheld cameras, that it becomes formalism, where the director and the cinematographer are trying to point out that this is in reality so much that it becomes obvious that it's not. Um, so this is, I don't really think that's what this movie accomplishes. I think it sets really clear boundaries between naturalism and formalism, where the naturalistic elements don't really blend into the formalistic ones. So like when she is in, so when she's trying to find men that live alone so that she can bring them back and eat them, she like sorry. She like it's very naturalistic. The talking is very naturalistic. The yeah, just the way they interact. Even the actors, like the men that she takes home, that she preys upon, are very average looking. They look like anyone you'd find walking down the street. But
I
when
think,
she,
oh, sorry.
oh no, go on.
I think a lot of the men, especially since she was in Scotland, because it takes place there, they very much seem to me like Scottish people that you would find on the street, especially the ones like coming home from a sports game, like on the street, because that just feels so real, because I feel like we've all seen that. And just like walking on the sidewalk, it felt very naturalistic. I remember when we were watching it, we were like, are these even actors? Or are they just people that they found? So I think they definitely did a good job with that if they were going for naturalism.
Yes. But and so then the formalistic elements were so jarring. They would like when we see the two men suspended in like this black water, and then they touch hands reminiscent to God creating Adam, that famous painting, and you see this dude just turn into skin, and then you see his flesh, his meat being sucked away into this other dimension. that doesn't blend in any way with naturalistic elements. It is very, very
Yeah.
poignantly a movie.
I think there were several technical elements in that scene that made it so formalistic, and one I would say is the sound or lack thereof, because it's completely silent, which is very formalistic because obviously that never happens in real life where it's just dead silence. They were just kind of suspended there, looking at each other. Very formalistic, but just the lack of sound kind of stood out to me as something that is like definitely embracing the fact that it is a movie.
Definitely. So why don't we start, we'll go through all the elements that we've been assigned to discuss, mise en scène, camera, sound, acting, and editing. We can start with naturalism first, kind of go through like what elements, build that portion of the film, and then we'll move on to formalism. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Perfect. So let's talk about mise en scène. And before we started the discussion, we spoke a lot about costume, the way Scarlett Johansson was dressed. Does anyone want to take that on? Yeah.
Basically, they tried to make her look as youthful and feminine as they could, and I think that's on purpose because she's trying to seduce men off the street, and I guess she's trying to go for what's gonna work the best in this scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So she's wearing a lot of pink and a lot of, like, she's wearing like a tank top and like some other stuff, and it's obviously not inherently discussed in the movie, but it's very obvious its purpose, since she buys the clothes herself, that it's so that she can seduce the men.
Yeah.
For the meat.
I remember reading a review off of IMDb that said Scarlett Johansson's role in this film is to pick up desperate men and get naked. And
Basically.
that feels extremely like voyeuristic and kind of sophilic to me. But I think as then this is dipping slightly into acting, as Johan's character is slowly realizing like what it truly means to feel human. You get this like vague painted reality of like, oh, this means sexy, so I'm gonna put this on so I can get meat. So I think the costuming along with the character really builds the intent of Scarlett Johansson's character. And remember at the beginning of the movie, she took the clothes off of someone.
Did she take them off, or did the motorcyclist take them off?
I believe she took them off. Like in that the scene where with the white background and the black silhouette. Mm-hmm. Also, gorgeous shot. I love that shot. Geek out over that shot for the rest of my life.
Speaking of costuming, even her haircut is really, it's really just like short and choppy, and it just adds another layer to like this youthful kind of, like, I kind of reminded me of the Cool Girl monologue from Gone Girl, where it's like she doesn't, her haircut is just really, it's just short and choppy, and it's meant to make her look like she doesn't care about anything. She's kind of like aloof and emotionless, which is sometimes deemed attractive. And then and it clearly worked for her because this was her whole goal, at least in the first half of the movie, to lure men in and to steal their bodily matter.
Yeah, I think kind of piggybacking off what you guys have been saying about costume, I think looking at the costume of the other characters, especially the men, they're much more like very average costumes. Like it's kind of like there's nothing flamboyant about them. They look kind of much more naturalistic. I think like they just grabbed them off the street and said, "Hey, be in our movie." I think that really did it really served the movie well, especially for making it a little more naturalistic.
And one thing that I'm like just thinking about, when she goes to the mall and she borrows the lipstick.
Oh, she actually? I forgot. I didn't know if she actually took it or she actually bought it.
If I'm recalling it correctly, she went into a makeup store, I believe.
I think
and
she went into a department store.
yeah. So the red lipstick kind of takes on its own meaning of sorts, something that's considered seductive, and it's almost this literal self-reflexive moment, and I think that's kind of where we begin to see the development of this character, through this lipstick, because you have the little round mirror, that you're always staring into. So I feel like that really aided in, kind of making this more of a naturalistic experience. Like, in all reality, like, yeah, she's an alien, whatever, but it's slowly building her character as human. Does anyone else have anything to add on for mise en scène?
Not, and I think, oh, I mean, there the sets or lack of sets. Everything was shot on scene, on the street, and in the mall. Just you could tell they were. No one was looking directly into camera, but they were definitely getting some looks. But I guess that really fits for the movie. If Scarlett Johansson is like this beautiful, ethereal kind of being that people are naturally drawn to, especially men. So.
And that's almost like a low budget thing. That probably reduced the cost because, if I'm remembering correctly, using like scenes where you really kind of have free reign, you don't have to pay anything, you don't have to build it, it's just there. And I'm sure that aided in cost as well as making the whole thing feel a lot more naturalistic. And I don't know where this falls. This may fall into sound, and if it does, we can push it on to later. But a lot of the interaction. No, that's acting. You know what? Well, I'm gonna save that for later. I'll save that for later. Do you want to move on to camera? All right, cool. So there were several establishing shots in this movie. I'm thinking a lot about the beach shots, with the child crying, the wood shot when she's walking out of the woods and she's on fire, and yeah, you want to talk about that in regards to naturalism?
I think in some ways the use of like the wide shots or establishing shots, I think those really helped kind of make it a little more naturalistic because like you're kind of watching from afar, I think, which is kind of I think a more naturalistic view to have the movie from because obviously this has never actually happened to anyone, so you're kind of more like an audience, I guess. So I think in some ways also formalistic too. So I think it'd be taken both ways.
I think, in a sense, if you see something really close up, it's kind of hard to imagine yourself being there. Like if you have like a close up on two people. But if you see it from like afar like that, it's kind of looks like what you would see if you were just like on the other side of the beach or like other side of the woods. So I think it definitely makes it more naturalistic, but it also has a formalistic element because of how styled it is.
Yeah, and I think I think like the going back to scenery. I'm sorry, this is kind of an awkward jump, but the establishing shots. We the whole movie takes place in kind of two extremes in major populated cities and then in essentially the middle of nowhere, except for those few shots where we see the man that she let go get murdered and put into the back of the trunk. And I think even that in itself kind of adds to the self-reflexive nature of the film, because it demonstrates like the maximum and minimums, I guess, of humanity, where she's in two places, place completely built by humans, and other places that are sort of idyllic and untouched. And I think the film knows that in putting her, a non-human, into these extremes, maybe.
I definitely think you're right in the fact that they did know what they were doing with that. And I think that itself is really smart. I really like seeing the contrast between like the city and then like really pristine places like that beach. And like there were no people there and there were no people in the woods. It was just very much giving her a whole human experience of like two ends of a very broad spectrum, like in the very busy, crowded city, and then in nature where there isn't anybody else. And I think, as you said, it's really interesting that they did that.
There was her attacker in the woods, which was...
That is true.
I'm curious. I wonder why they put him there. I mean, obviously there's the element of like the spooky, eerie woods. She couldn't escape from them. Oh, well, yeah, there's, I think, a kind of like a classic horror element where she could not, like, there are those scenes where characters are running through the woods and they can't find their way out and they can't escape. And that's kind of what happened to her. Like she couldn't get away, even though her, hunter was a much more real kind of villain. And so I think that is also maybe a part of the self-reflexive nature of the film. Maybe more formalistic is playing into that trope of kind of haunted woods, especially because the man disappears for a while and then there he is again. He's right there.
If I remember, I'm sorry to cut you off, but if I remember correctly, he did have a purpose for being there because his truck was there.
Right.
So I think he was probably like a logger cutting down trees, and that's how he found her in like the little shack. And I think he disappeared to go back to the truck to get the fuel to light her on fire.
Okay, but I think the timeline is incorrect on that, because I think he we know that he tried to molest her, and then she ran away. He was gone for a little while, and then he caught up and
that instance was weird.
And then tried to rape her again, and then he left to get fuel, I think.
Yes.
When he saw that she was sort of falling apart, and then he lit her on fire. Okay. And then, sorry, I just came up with another horror trope, like burning the witch at the stake.
Burning the witch, yeah.
Yeah, where that's definitely, I think, reminiscent of that. Right, because why witches were burned because well, I think witches were burned because they were like they weren't following. Why? What was the historical reasoning behind that?
I think because they were thought being a witch was thought to have a connection with Satan.
Right.
And like in very religious societies, obviously, that was not acceptable, so they would burn them at the stake.
But what were they doing that made people think that? Was it like disobeying general rule, or
people would just like suspect them of being a witch, and then they would just immediately burn them. Like if you read into the Salem witch trials, that's what happened.
Yeah.
Just a quick little side note. Ethan's frozen.
I was gonna say, it's like, is Ethan okay? What's happening there?
Oh no!
And now he's not here.
Yeah.
Okay. That did happen to me once in one of our past videos, and we were okay.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be okay.
It's gonna be good. He's safe. Okay, he has the link.
All right, he'll come back.
He'll come back. Woo!
So I guess you could compare her and to like the burning of the Salem witch trials, where he didn't really understand the creature that he was seeing, just in the same way like all of those girls were tortured. They didn't really understand even if their abnormal behavior, whatever it might be, no matter how small. Hi,
Well,
Ethan.
Welcome back.
Um,
As some background on the Salem witch trials, the main reason was that there's a certain type of bacteria or something, I believe, growing on the wheat that had hallucinogenic properties.
oh,
And so people would eat it and then see weird stuff.
okay.
And then they'd be like, a witch. And then they'd burn them.
I did not know
And
that.
that's the reason why it happened.
Hmm.
Bad wheat.
But I think there's definitely a tie to her and
Yes,
the
there's
perception
a-
of witches in.
I think the perception of witches in like a lot of movies is that like they actually are witches. So I think
Yeah.
this is different in the fact that like it's different from real life in the fact that there weren't really any witches. It was all just like the chemicals or girls who wanted attention in the sense that they would like accuse all those women of being witches and trying to hurt them. And this is a lot more real. So I personally, like, I do see the burning of the witch trope, but I think they relate her as being more of like a monster than a witch.
I don't know. I think we're supposed to feel more sympathy for her at the end. Like I think,
That's true.
like I don't think we're supposed to see her exactly as a monster.
I just kind of saw her as an extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
Not good or bad, just kind of neutral.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the end. I do think they want you to feel kind of sympathy because I think she really tried to fit in. Like she kind of left her ways, but I think she really tried to fit in. Ultimately, she couldn't fit in. So I think you kind of could look either way. Like I think you could feel sympathy that she like didn't fit in. But you also kind of feel neutral because like, oh, she's extraterrestrial, she's not human. Like it doesn't really matter. But yeah.
For me, the most formalistic aspect of the film was the skin, because obviously that is very different from reality. And the thing that stuck out to me the most is when she was holding it in front of her and it blinked back at her. That was super, super formalistic in the sense that it's something experimental and new that they were trying.
And like
Yeah.
being surrounded by that very natural habitat, I think that really ties together the stark contrast between the naturalism and the formalism, and it's like a nice little, you know, icing on the cake moment. And I like that we've slowly like moved from sound into acting like perfectly, because like what you guys were talking, how did I get this cut on my arm? Anyways, what you guys are talking about with that, you know, the trials and, you know, the element of history added into it, that sort of follows like writing. But yeah, the Scarlett Johansson really kind of, you know, takes this idea of being otherworldly, and does a phenomenal job with, you know, playing the part of slowly realizing what it means to be human. And that in itself is a reflexive aspect. You know, the process of, you know, acting, getting into character, it just feels like some giant break in the movie, giant realization that you know, we start out really not knowing what's going on, and we slowly, you know, develop our ideas and feelings, and, you know, we learn how to feel, and an actor has to do that with their characters. You know, we do that as we grow up. We like develop our own opinions and ideas, and this character does the exact same thing. And just something that I was just peeking at. I pulled up the Internet Movie Database website for Under the Skin, and I realized, and I don't know why I didn't realize this earlier, but no one had a name.
Oh, you're right.
Scarlett Johansson, she's noted as the female. Jeremy McWilliams is noted as the bad man, so on and so forth.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Isn't that so wild? And that has a lot to do with the writing as well. And it's like, how are we distracted by that so much? It's just mind-boggling to me. And, you know, we're so used to seeing in movies, you know, these characters with all these names and these identities, but there really isn't a single identity in this movie.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
we so briefly see so many of the characters before they either get like sunk into her void or you just never see them again.
Ethan, do you remember the last point you made? Because you said something and it made me think of something and now I can't remember it.
Shoot. What did I say last?
Oh, darn it.
I'm drawing a blank here.
That's okay. I think it
Yeah.
also had something to do with all of the characters being nameless. Um,
Oh, lack of dialogue, maybe. I was thinking the lack of dialogue would help, like, kind of distract from like the fact there's no characters because like they're not talking to each other very much, so like don't necessarily need names.
right. I don't know. I'm right. I can't remember. It's embarrassing. Um, yeah, I think especially I think ScarJo doesn't have a name mostly because
Scarjo.
it doesn't entirely matter what her name is, right? Like she's
Mhm.
like these people that she's talking to, the people that she ends up seducing, they don't like it's all very, very brief interactions. And like so her name doesn't matter.
I
Like
also, oh, sorry.
sorry, I was just gonna say she could be anyone, and that's I think part of the appeal. Or I
What I
think
was
that's part of the reason why it works. Yeah.
what I was gonna add on to that is the fact that since she's seducing so many people, I think that her lack of name is kind of reminiscent of how the men view her because they don't view her as a person having like a name or a personality. They just view her as a source of sex for her body. And I think that's very intentional.
Yeah.
That, she doesn't have a name. She doesn't give them a name. Like, how desperate must they be to not even know this woman's name and go sleep with her in like an abandoned place after she picks them up on the street? Like, they are only using her for one thing. And I think that is very apparent. I also kind of wanted to get into the aspect of like voyeurism and like sexual perversion in the film. Because we were talking about that before. If anybody wants to add on to that.
Yeah, so I feel like I engage with Laura Mulvey's visual pleasure narrative cinema a lot, now that I've like learned about it. And I'm thinking a lot about the concept of building the voyeuristic scopophilic experience in the cinema, because you have like you're in a dark auditorium and you're looking at a very bright screen when you're watching a movie, so it creates this feeling of intimacy, privacy, something that could be perceived as erotic, especially when you have very sexualized feminine characters. So I'm thinking back to the scenes in the abandoned houses when she would lure the men in. You're in a very dark room. It's literally black, and we when we were watching the movie, we described it as something upside downish. We called it the upside down.
It's the Stranger Things reference.
Yeah.
For those who do not know.
And that's an auditorium itself, because you're surrounded by nothing. Like if we were to sit in the position of the male character that's being lured in, you literally have nothing but just this woman's face, and it's drawing you in and it's luring you in. And that in itself, as I'm discussing this, I'm realizing how self-reflexive this movie is.
Yeah.
Because that is the experience you gain in a theater. And this is recognizing that, being an audience member and just being some random person off the street who's just experiencing this in the moment and getting sucked in.
I also wanted to comment on another I think the sex scenes in particular are another way that they kind of combined, or not combined, but showed both naturalism and formalism. The naturalistic element that I really saw. Oh, okay, Ethan, you're good.
I'm back.
Okay. I think in a lot of sex scenes in movies, they're obviously very censored because, you know, you don't want to see that. But these ones were very graphic and just like very full frontal, which made it seem a lot more realistic, as like it makes the audience feel like a voyeur because we feel like we're watching something very private, whereas in a lot of other movies it's very like censored and you just kind of like know what's going on, but you don't see anything. But like that was very naturalistic in the fact that that was happening, but it was also very formalistic in the sense that they just kind of like took off all their clothes and walked towards her into this abyss and slowly sunk down, because it obviously had a supernatural element. But I thought it was interesting how they not combined but like used both at the same time and did so successfully.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. So we just have like this one could be really brief. Editing. I know we were thinking about going along the lines of just like sticking to naturalism first and then doing formalism. But I think, you know, as the conversation developed, we took bits and pieces, and that's totally okay. We don't there's like no specific structure to be followed. And do you want to talk about like editing very briefly in the sense of, you know, naturalism and formalism? Because I don't know, I feel like I was distracted away from editing. Someone mentioned that it was very slow.
Yeah, I was thinking the shots seemed a bit longer than kind of normal shots, especially for more of an action movie or drama. I think the pace of the movie was very slow. And I think I had to do part with the shots being much longer. I think in some ways it made it a bit more naturalistic in that like time usually doesn't fly by as it does in movies. It's usually a bit slower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was that one scene, and I think we were all kind of zoned out at this point. We were just like eating and chatting, and we kind of overlooked this.
We had some snacks.
Where ScarJo was the center point of the shot, and everything was like surrounding her. And this immediately made me think of that Kissing Booth 2 moment where Elle is, you know, sitting there and she has all her thoughts swarming around her. Yeah, I don't know. That's just what came to my head first, just because we talked about that last week.
Kissing Booth 2 took direct inspiration from Under the Skin. You can definitely see the parallelism between the two films. It's incredible.
We have a couple theories on
that. Do you think that the Kissing Booth 2, or just the Kissing Booth in general, actually specifically the second one, is a documentary about how the coronavirus started? It started through the Kissing Booth.
Yep.
Conspiracy theories.
Yep.
Elle is a criminal mastermind.
Does anyone have anything else to add? Anything that we may have skipped over? Or
I think that we should take this time to do our weekly hello to Bart. Hi, Bart.
Hi, Bart.
Hey, Bart.
Bart is our mascot.
Yes, he's our official mascot.
He's a beautiful man. He really is.
So if that's the case, I have one more question. Which character in Under the Skin would you guys find at Clark?
Oh, okay. I want to say that second guy that she seduced.
At the party?
Yeah.
Oh, the one who was like dancing?
Yeah. I feel like you would find him at Clark.
Because I was thinking the group of girls that sort of dragged her into the party, like, well, you know, she wasn't even planning. She just got dragged there. I was thinking they'd probably go here.
Yeah.
I don't know. They seem a little too mainstream.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people at Clark are Not mainstream.
Underground.
Underground.
I'm
here.
an underground person.
Like Billie Eilish.
I'm a mole.
I think that there are some like party boys on campus who would act like that man.
Yeah.
Yep.
He might just like also play guitar. I want to show you.
Okay, Marco.
Isn't Booth 2 a reference? Whoa! When worlds collide.
All right. So that was a really good discussion. Honestly, like if we had the time, we could sit here and chat about this movie all night. There's a lot of really self-reflexive, naturalistic and formalistic elements we could go over. Yeah.
Oh wait, can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
I think even like the films had a really difficult narrative structure. Like I didn't spend that much time thinking about it, but I had a difficult time thinking about like inciting incident and things like that. And I think that in itself is probably a formalistic element. The fact that it was just kind of
It didn't really have a straightforward plot.
Exactly.
And it didn't really follow the structure.
It was just following her around for a couple of days and like whatever happened.
It felt like a documentary.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
I think I got the feeling of this film like it could have taken place like a few days earlier. Like I don't know, that was just something. And then obviously it would have been completely different and we wouldn't have gotten the same thing. But like I think you could have had the same effect. And it could have maybe had some of the same messages and imagery. Like what if the film ended with her, instead of her dying, with her realizing her own humanness and her growing empathy instead. I think you could easily move it just because the plot points weren't as important anyway.
Her plot points depended so much on like her environment that I feel like if she was anywhere else or if it had taken place on a different day, things would have gone differently.
Yeah.
And I think that's very documentary-ish. Naturalism.
I didn't didn't even consider that. Like I was thinking about it. I'm like, plot point 1, midpoint.
Don't know.
Don't know.
Maybe then it is kind of to the point where it's a snake biting its own tail kind of thing. Maybe it does loop around that way just because the story, like the whole story itself, while it is so naturalistic that it doesn't follow most of the conventions. I guess it I guess it would be snake biting its own tail. Yeah.
All right. I guess that wraps us up for this week.
Yeah.
Well, this is our class one.
We're gonna pull out all the stops for our YouTube series.
We'll also be in person probably. Yeah. With our masks, of course.
Of course.
Of course.
Without fail. All right.
And our mics.
Sounds good. I'm gonna stop the recording.